All right, let's talk New Orleans Saints. It's been a whirlwind offseason, of course, for the Saints, bringing in new head coach Kellen Moore, filling out a really solid coaching staff overall, and making some key decisions for the future of this team. We've covered a lot of that. It's been an exciting offseason for New Orleans. But lost in the hustle and bustle, it's been a really solid move the Saints have made during free agency. Not only did they pick up a quality player and address a major problem, they got it at a fair price, maybe even a lot of value there as well. We'll break that down in just a second. But first, I'm Nick, that's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, talking New Orleans Saints free agency, they made a couple key moves, some small ones, some bigger ones. And one of the bigger moves was the addition of safety Justin Reid. It makes a lot of sense on paper. When you dive really deep into the numbers, it looks like a fantastic move at a great price. Let's go into the report first, and we'll break down the numbers on the other side. This was a tweet from the NFL account. Saints safety Justin Reid agreed to a 3-year, $31.5 million bucks with $22.5 million guaranteed via Rap Sheet, which is of course Ian Rappaport. So again, we're looking at a 3-year deal worth a little bit more than $10 million. So let's go to the next chart here because I think this is really important. So on this chart right here in front of us, this is going to highlight the run defense grade, the tackling grade, and the coverage grade for the New Orleans Saints on the left, those three bars. Blue is run defense, green is tackling, gray is coverage, and then Justin Reid's grades and his rankings there, excuse me, on the right. Again, blue run defense, green tackling, gray coverage. So you can see the Saints, they were 31st in run defense, 29th in tackling, and 25th in coverage grade in 2024. Big weaknesses, big problem. You can't be that bad in all three of those categories, right? You got to be able to stop the run. You got to be able to cover, and for God's sakes, you got to be able to tackle. And the Saints were in the bottom 8 in all of those, second to worst in run defense, fourth to worst in tackling. So they got some problems there. But when you look at Justin Reid, he is one of the key pieces here who could literally be the solution. Because if you look at his grades at the safety position, he was the 8th best run defender. He was the 8th best tackler, and he was the 8th best in coverage. Beautifully consistent across the board. This is one of those moves that a lot of people say, oh, that's a good solid addition. But when you look into what a team's weaknesses are and what their holes are on a roster, a lot of times you can only address, say, maybe one problem, right? You've got a big issue in run defense. So, hey, listen, we have to bring in a safety who's good at run defending, but maybe he stinks in coverage or whatever. Or we have a real problem tackling on our defense. We'll bring in a couple good tacklers, but these guys just can't cover very well, whatever it may be. It's incredibly rare. It's almost impossible to get a player that addresses two issues on your defense or offense, let alone all three. And that's exactly what the Saints did with Justin Reid. Again, at $10 million per year, that's right around the going rate. That's only 15th highest cap hit on an annual basis, that $10 million a year, a little bit more than that, of course, in the NFL at the safety position. So it's not like they reset the market, which normally is what happens, by the way. If you're bringing a veteran quality experienced player that's supposed to address a lot of things on your team, which again is very rare, normally in order to do that, you have to completely reset the market. The Saints didn't do that. They got the 15th cap hit for Reid at the safety position. Phenomenal work here by New Orleans. Again, there's been a lot of smaller moves, a lot of camp restructurings, a lot of bringing people back into the fold. But the addition of Justin Reid, looking at the data here, once again, the Saints were bad in run defense, bad in tackling, bad in coverage. You can see on the scale on the left there. And Reid comes in and will be a massive help in all three of those categories right away and at a fair price. I'll even say a pretty big discount. Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But first, Saints fans, in the comment section below. Obviously, there's been a couple moves here that made some headlines. Reid is probably one of the bigger ones for the Saints, of course. How would you grade the Justin Reid acquisition, especially now that you've seen some of this data and see the strategy behind it? Do you give it an A? Do you think it's a great move? Give it an F? You're not really a big fan of it. Give it a C, kind of in wait and see mode, see how he turns out. Let us know your grade for the Justin Reid acquisition. Put it in the comment section below. But Miles, over to you. What are your thoughts on the addition of the New Orleans Saints, adding Justin Reid into the fold and at the price that did it?
Yeah, Nick, I think there's some really interesting comparisons of how Justin Reid is going to do with this team because he's a guy, he's been around the league now for a little bit of time. He's a veteran guy, we'll say, obviously, 28. He's not super old, but he's been around the league for quite some time. I think he's going into his 8th year in the NFL now, so he got in obviously very, very early. But this is a guy who I think you saw early in his career. He was at Houston, and he's up and down, had 2 good years, 2 bad years. Then he moves over to Kansas City, a little more consistent, coming off one of his better years in recent memory for 2024 season. And now he's coming to the Saints. And I think if you're a Saints fan, you wonder, have we ever seen another guy follow that trajectory? We'll have another safety here who in 2018, he played for Houston. Then he went to the Kansas City Chiefs for 3 years after that. And then he moved over to the New Orleans Saints. And of course, we're talking about Tyrann Mathieu, the Saints' other safety. And how did he perform with the Saints? So you see Tyrann Mathieu about average when he was in Kansas City, around the high 60s, low 70s, where his overall grades. Immediately, he comes over to the Saints with all the Saints players in 2022, 2023, two highest graded seasons of his career, 81.2 and 81.3 overall, respectively. Last year, the Saints were so decimated with injuries. I don't think you can really throw that's more of an outlier season. Still did okay, average, like a low 60 grade for him there. But I think when we see Justin Reid, you can kind of compare what he brings to the table. Obviously, he fits all of the needs for the Saints, like your charts alluded to. But I think this is going to be a guy whose play can be elevated by what the Saints do defensively as well. I think they really put their safeties in advantageous positions. We saw it out of Tyrann Mathieu. I think we're going to see something very similar because they're very similar paths of players as far as where they played, the styles of defensive that played in. Justin Reid, I think, is going to fit this team really, really well. And I expect to see him. He's coming off of one of the best year, of his career in 2024. But I expect to see him do even better with the Saints in this coming year, just because I think they're going to put him in some situations where he's able to thrive and really just do a lot of good things. But to your point, moreover, I think Justin Reid, he brings a lot to the table for this Saints team. I think they got him for a great deal. And I think for what he brings to the table, he's going to elevate this Saints team more than what they were going to bring to him as far as paying. I don't think the dollars are ever going to overshadow what he brings to this Saints team. And I think we're going to see a huge rise in defensive play from the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, and if you look at what other teams were shelling out at the safety position on an annualized basis this offseason, it was a significant amount more dollars than what the Saints gave up for Justin Reid. Let's look at Cameron Bynum, who went to the Indianapolis Colts. I'm a big fan of Bynum, by the way. I think he's actually around the same quality of player as Reid here. Bynum got $15 million per year. Javon Holland, who I don't think is as good, got 15-1 with the Giants. You got Xavier McKinney last year, got 16-8 from the Packers. Trayvon Moring got formerly of the Raiders going to the Titans, got 17 million. Right, you can look down these numbers and say, man, the safeties got a lot of money thrown at them this offseason, except for the Saints getting Justin Reid. Reid, of course, is a hometown local kid. Sure, there's a little bit of a discount there. And look, if the Saints use that to their advantage to get some salary cap benefit, good for them. I'm glad to see the Saints are finally taking more advantage of things like that, trying to get quality players in at a little bit of a discount. But I think you bring up a great point when it comes to scheme fit, because obviously the last season, the Saints safety, Will Harris, opposite of Tyrann Mathieu, was a great highlight guy in terms of getting a big hit stick kind of hit on receivers or running backs once every few weeks. But he just was a below average player. Let's be totally honest. He just was not a good football player. Good for the highlights, good for the physical players, flew around, was a high energy guy. That's all great. But the reality is he just wasn't good enough at the safety position. He left. He's now with the Commanders. The Commanders gave him a $40 million per year annualized contract, which again tells you how good Harris is if he's only getting $4 million per year, and Reid is a discount at $10 million. And I think this is the Saints understanding that we need to really find a way to add some stability to our defense. It's not about having a guy that can make a highlight play. It's a guy who covers up the weaknesses and allows guys like Mathieu, allows us to get creative with blitzes and stuff in the front seven and let them get after it. A safety that can help our corners out in coverage. If you look at what Reid did with the Kansas City Chiefs under defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo, it was a lot of, okay, we're going to do some exotic zone blitzes. We're going to throw some crazy stuff, and Reid will protect us on the back end, right? We can do a lot of funky stuff towards an offense the Chiefs did, all out blitzes, crazy drops, things like that. But we can rely on Justin Reid. That way, if things go south, if we don't get home, he'll protect us from anything disastrous in the coverage game. And that's exactly what Reid did. Quality tackler. Again, he was on islands. The Chiefs would do some funky blitzes, and if they didn't get home, there'd be guys running wide open, and it relied on Reid to cover up those holes or to make good, clean tackles. Otherwise, they were giving up touchdowns. And Reid, time again, time again. I think it was at least 2 or 3 times a game. He was the guy that broke up the pass. He was the guy that made the key tackle those few times where those exotic blitzes didn't work out. And that gave the Chiefs a lot of flexibility. It allowed them to really be hyper aggressive because they knew Justin Reid on the back end would cover up any issues. I think that's what the Saints will get here. Tyrann Mathieu, to your point, will be unleashed. He'll now be allowed to do whatever he wants. He'll be allowed to blitz. He'll be allowed to live in the live in the box. He'll be able to undercut routes even more than he has in the past because he has a guy in his safety cohort in Reid who can cover up weaknesses. Will Harris was more of a guy who wants to play in the box, a guy who wants to just hit people and fly around, which is great. But what it does is it limits the rest of your defense. Justin Reid unlocks the rest of your defense. And again, they got him at a discount, especially considered what other teams were shilling out for the safety position. He's a veteran, championship culture, championship pedigree. He's bought into the city, obviously. He loves Louisiana. This was a fantastic move by the New Orleans Saints.